Hey everyone, Elliot from Els Auto Care here. Today we're replacing the rear discs and pads on this customer's 57 plate Vauxhall Mariva. It's a bit of an interesting one this is, so make sure you watch it towards the end so you can find out the issue that I found. Thank you. Okay, as normal with the wheel off here, we're going to take the opportunity to check everything over. We've got to check the spring, make sure it's not cracked, check for rust. We're going to check the shock. This is a dust cover here, it's actually rusted down, so we're going to lift that up and look for any moisture underneath it. It doesn't look like it's leaking. Check everything else, everything's solid, check the brake hoses and everything like that. Once you're happy with it, move on to the next step. I'm going to start by removing this disc retaining screw as a T30 Torx. The reason I'm doing it now is because the handbrake goes on and I don't have to compete then with the disc spinning around. It makes it a lot easier. I'm glad this come off straight away, because last time I did one of these I had to end up chiseling it off and it was a bit of a nightmare, and this could have been a totally different video. Normally at this point I would compress the piston to get it past the disc, but with it being on the back this time I'm not going to. I'm going to start with... So these two caliper carrier bolts are 13mm. They're rather thin bolts, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the spanner on the holding nut on the inside, which is a 17mm, and crack that off instead, rather than taking the chance of rounding the nut off. Just loosen it up for now and then go down to the other one, so it's easier, so it's not, caliper's not swinging around. And then just wind them both out then with your fingers. Now with those two nuts out, the bolts out, we're going to pry this caliper off. I'm going to use a pry bar. The one I got is a bit excessive, but it's the first one I laid my hands on in the van. You can probably just use a screwdriver or something like that just to wedge it off. Just be gentle not to damage anything and you'll be fine. With this being on the back end, it's got that the handbrake cable built into it, so we don't really have to worry too much about the strain on the hose on this occasion, because that will hold it up as a nice thick cable. So just put that back out to one side and we'll take away these carrier bolts. These are E16, so you might need to get additional sockets for this job, but they're ready available at Whole Foods or any other sort of parts shop, whatever you want to go to. Oh, they're probably locked on then.
I did just that one, or was it another one as well?
You have to change them both at the same, do you?
Oh, is it?
Yeah. But they'll be right now.
Oh, cool. Thank you.
No worries. These rear bolts were seized in there pretty tight. I just used an impact gun on it to get it out nice and easy and convenient for me, But you could have used a breaker bar, and if that didn't work, you could have put a jack handle over it or something like that just to get them off. You can see here that the pads are seized in the carrier. Just the force them out there, they weren't sliding in there freely at all. So now we're going to clean up these surfaces where the pads sit. First I'm going to use a wire brush and get this hardware out of the way. Use a wire brush to get the big chunks out of the way, and then go over it with a file just to make sure it is nice and clean, because these are in real bad condition. With those surfaces clean now, we're going to clean up the sliders and the pins in the back just to make sure that they're sliding properly. Wipe the old grease off and put some new grease on. I'm using a special rubber grease here because it goes through the rubber boot, and sometimes those boots can swell and cause them to drag, so it affects your braking power. So I like to make sure it's all running smoothly down here. With them all cleaned up, let's go back to the hub. We've took that retaining screw out already, so these should just fall off. If they don't, just give it a hit around the surface with a hammer, and it should pop right off. Now I'm going to clean the surface up with some brake clean and some sandpaper. It's quite abrasive sandpaper, just to make sure it's nice and clean. Just do what you can. It doesn't have to be perfect, it doesn't have to be showroom finish, but you want to make sure it's nice and smooth so it's not causing any sort of warps or wobbles in the disc when it's on there. With all that clean now, let's wind back this piston. I'm using a universal brake wind back tool. It's a set with about 20 different adapters. I'll leave a link in the description for you. They're only about £20 off Amazon or something like that. You can get cheaper ones, but being I'm using them all the time on different vehicles, I got a proper set, you know. So what we're going to do is just put it inside the grooves, make sure it all lines up, we've got the right adapter, and just twist the piston back into place. That allows pressure and a turning force at the same time. You can use like Mo grips and a G-clamp or something like that, but you take the risk of damaging the boot and you just don't want to do that. You have to replace the caliper, it's too much money. You want to wind the piston back until it stops. You don't want to try forcing it anymore. Once it's there, just crack off the tool and move on to the next stage. So we're going to put the disc on now. Make sure the hole lines up so we can put the retaining screw back in, and then hold it into place and pop the screw in. We haven't got the handbrake to hold the disc here still, so we're just going to hold it and go across the middle when it gets tight, because that reduces the amount of force on the turning, so it doesn't spin the wheel. Now it's time to refit the carrier. It's those E16 bolts to the back again. So just put it into place, make sure everything lines up, and then just finger tight the first one in. because you don't want to tighten this all the way up just to find that the bottom one's not lined up properly and then have to undo it all again. So once you're happy with that one, move on to the bottom one. And when they're both finger tight, grab your ratchet and then tighten them up all the way, as tight as you can get them. Now it's time to fit the pads, so make sure you lube them up and slide them into place. This here is a brake wear indicator. I like to put it on the leading edge, so that's going to let you know now when your pads need changing. It's going to make a grinding and squealing noise on the disc. I put it on there so when the piston hits against it, it presses against the disc first. Then you're going to want to line the caliper up and replace the bolts. Again, thread in one hand tight, then move on to the other one before you tighten them all down, just to make sure everything's perfect. Then once you're happy with everything, get your spanners back out, put the 17mm again on the retaining bolt and just tighten it all the way up as tight as you can. For some reason it didn't record when I was pressing the brake pedal, but the next stage you want to do is pump the brake pedal before you go off driving, so you can set the pads nicely onto the discs so you haven't got travel in there when you try to move later on. Okay, so if you remember at the start I told you this, it was an interesting one. If you didn't notice in the video here, you can see that this boot on the brake piston has ripped. On the other side it's even worse and the piston has actually seized. So I've had to go ahead with a caliper replacement on that side because I couldn't wind it back in. Luckily we were able to wind this one back in. You've seen it in the video going back in, but the other side wouldn't. So if you stay tuned, I've got another video coming up shortly to tell you how to replace the caliper on the same vehicle. Thanks guys, like and subscribe. Cheers.